The sun was just beginning to set over the quiet streets of Bell Ridge, Virginia. A golden hue brushed the tops of the pine trees, and long shadows stretched lazily across the road. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday, but within minutes, that calm suburban silence would be shattered by flashing lights, raised voices, and the unmistakable sound of dignity being crushed under a badge. Staff Sergeant Darren Ellis had just finished his shift at Fort Lyndon. He wasn't in any rush. His niece's birthday was coming up, and he'd promised to bring home the special strawberry yogurt from her favorite market. It was a small thing, but for Darren, small things mattered. He drove his 2012 Toyota Camry carefully, wearing his full U.S. Army service uniform, pressed, polished, pristine, medals neatly aligned. Name tag reading, Ellis. Not out of vanity, not because he was fresh off any ceremony, but because he always wore it now. Always. The grocery bag in his passenger seat rustled as he turned onto Willowbrook Avenue. That's when the red and blue lights ignited behind him. Darren sighed softly, pulled over immediately, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. His movements were slow, deliberate, like muscle memory, like survival. A white Ford Explorer cruiser came to a stop behind him. The door slammed. A figure approached briskly. White male, mid-30s, Oakley's on, hand already near the holster. Darren glanced up through the side mirror. He kept his voice calm. "Evening, officer." The cop didn't respond to the greeting. Instead, he barked, "License and registration." Darren kept his hands where they were. "Officer, I'm Staff Sergeant Darren Ellis, United States Army. I'm currently in uniform, just left Fort Lyndon." "I didn't ask for a speech," the officer snapped, cutting him off. "License, registration, now." Darren exhaled slowly. "My ID is in my left pocket. May I reach for it?" The officer's hand twitched near his sidearm. "Do it slow." Darren reached deliberately, presented the ID, along with his military credentials. The officer took them, squinted at them, then frowned. "What's a guy like you doing in this neighborhood?" Darren hesitated. "I live here, 2059 Briar Lane, less than a mile that way." "Step out of the vehicle." Darren blinked. "Sir, may I ask why?" "Your plates don't match the registered address." "That's because the car was purchased out of state while I was stationed at Fort Bliss. The title hasn't been updated yet. Everything else is current. You can run it." The officer didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back, unsnapped the strap on his holster, and called into his radio. Darren's heart began to pound, but his face stayed composed. His training kicked in. De-escalate, comply, survive. A second cruiser arrived. 2 more officers stepped out. By now, a few neighbors had begun to peer from behind curtains. One woman across the street started filming. The first officer gestured. "Step out. Hands where I can see them." Darren opened the door slowly, emerging with both hands raised. The crisp shine of his uniform caught the light. One officer briefly paused, eyes flickering over Darren's ribbons and rank. But the first officer didn't flinch. "Turn around, hands on the car." Darren complied. "Spread your feet." A quick, rough pat-down. Then suddenly, click. The cold bite of handcuffs wrapped around Darren's wrists. "Sir," he said, jaw tight. "What's the charge?" "You fit the description of a suspect involved in credit card fraud earlier today." Darren's eyebrows lifted, incredulous. "In uniform?" "I said you fit the description," the officer repeated. "Don't talk back." Another officer quietly muttered something but was silenced with a glance. The tension thickened as Darren was pushed against the hood of his own car. Across the street, a teenage boy whispered to his father, "Dad, isn't that the guy who does flag ceremonies on Memorial Day?" The father didn't respond. He just kept recording. The moment that broke everything happened in a flash. Darren, turning slightly to protest the use of force, said, "This is a mistake. You're making a big—" The officer spun him violently around, shoving him backward. Darren stumbled, lost footing on the curb, and crashed hard onto the pavement. His head bounced off the concrete with a sickening thud. Gasps echoed from the onlookers. Still filming. Still stunned. Blood began to trickle from above Darren's eyebrow. His medals glinted in the dying light as he lay half-conscious on the street. The officer stood over him, breathing heavily. Then, as if noticing the camera for the first time, he sneered, "This is why you people shouldn't mouth off." Silence. Total, complete silence, and then, "Got that on tape," someone said. The officer froze. Darren blinked up at the sky, a buzzing in his ears. The stars hadn't come out yet, but something had changed. Not just in the air, but in him. Because for all the times he wore that uniform, deep down, he'd always known. It wasn't armor. It was camouflage. Not to blend in with enemies overseas, but to survive the war right here, back home. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway buzzed faintly above Darren's bed. His left temple was stitched, his wrists bruised from the cuffs. A small bag of saline dripped beside him. But Darren wasn't feeling the sting of the physical wounds. He was replaying everything, again and again, the way the officer had looked at him. Not as a man, not as a soldier. Just a profile, a threat, a target in a clean uniform. Outside his hospital room, muffled voices came and went. Medical staff, someone from base command, a family liaison. He ignored them all. But when the door creaked open and a familiar voice whispered, "Still getting into trouble without me, huh?" Darren looked up. His father stood in the doorway, older now, grayer, but still sharp-eyed and proud. Retired Gunnery Sergeant Harold Ellis, a Marine who'd survived Da Nang, lost 2 toes, and once stared down a captain for disrespecting a black chaplain during mess. "You came," Darren said. "Course I came. They told me you ended up in the ER instead of the market." Harold eased into the chair beside the bed. There was a long pause. Then finally Darren spoke. "Pops, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I know. They didn't even ask questions. They saw me. That was it. I know. And then, this uniform didn't mean a damn thing to them." Harold let out a sigh through his nose, rubbed his knuckles. "Want to know something funny?" he said. "Back in '72, I was stationed in North Carolina. Got invited to speak at a local high school, went in my dress blues. Just like you." Darren turned his head slightly. "Pulled over right after. Cop said I looked like a suspect who robbed a gas station. I was in a Marine uniform, holding a framed plaque in my hand. They still made me get on the ground." Darren swallowed. "I didn't tell you before," his father added quietly, "because I didn't want you to grow up angry. But I did want you to be smart." Darren looked at the IV drip. "I wasn't smart that day in 2015. His father tilted his head. "What happened?" And for the first time, Darren said it aloud. "It was in Arlington. I'd just moved there from El Paso. I was wearing jeans and a hoodie, going for a walk in the suburbs. Someone called the cops, said there was a suspicious black man walking around parked cars." His throat tightened. "They tackled me from behind, smashed my face into a sidewalk. They said I resisted. I didn't even hear them coming." Harold closed his eyes. "I filed a complaint," Darren went on. "They said it was reasonable force. I got a small settlement. Nothing public, no accountability." "And that's when you started." "Wearing the uniform all the time," Darren finished. He looked his father in the eye. "It's not just pride, Pops. I wore it so people wouldn't cross the street when I walked by, so clerks wouldn't follow me around, so cops would see me." There was silence. Then Harold nodded slowly. "I get it." "I thought the uniform gave me cover," Darren said. "But that day, that officer, he looked right through it, like it wasn't even there." His father leaned forward. "No, son, he didn't look through it. He chose not to see it." The next morning, Darren checked himself out of the hospital early. Despite protests from the nurse and commanding officer, he signed the discharge form, walked out with his uniform pressed and jaw tight. At home, his inbox was full. Media requests, a voicemail from a woman named Kayla Morris, public defender, a message from a Sergeant Cruz on base. "They're asking questions, man. High up. They're not brushing this under the rug." Darren stared at the screen, then turned it off. Instead, he opened the hallway closet. Inside hung 6 identical sets of his U.S. Army service uniform, starched, aligned, medals pre-pinned. Next to them, untouched for years, hung his civilian clothes, button-ups, jeans, a worn leather jacket he used to love. Still smelled faintly of aftershave and city nights. He touched one of the shirts. Just fabric, just color. But to the world outside, a risk. He slid the door shut. 3 days later, Kayla Morris met Darren in person for the first time. She was mid-30s, sharp and unapologetic. Her voice was smooth, but every word carried weight. She'd seen enough courtrooms, enough injustice, enough eroded trust in her short career to know how this story would be spun, unless someone like her got ahead of it. "You're not under arrest," she said, sitting across from him at the community legal aid office, "but you are part of an active investigation." Darren nodded. "They haven't officially charged you with resisting arrest or obstruction, Probably because they're waiting to see how much noise this video makes. "I'm not interested in publicity," he said. "I know, but you need to understand. This is bigger than you now." She slid a file across the table. "These are reports I pulled on Officer Langford. 3 prior complaints, 2 use-of-force incidents, 1 racial profiling accusation, never pursued." Darren kept flipping through the pages. "They don't want people like you to speak up, Sergeant Ellis. They count on silence. Your silence." "I've been silent before," he said quietly. She looked him in the eye. "Then maybe it's time to speak." That night, Darren stood in front of his bathroom mirror, still in uniform. He reached up, slowly unfastened each button, removed each pin, laid them down with care. Then, for the first time in years, he changed into plain clothes, a gray shirt, dark jeans. Nothing remarkable. But as he looked into the mirror, he felt his heart quicken. He wasn't just dressing down, he was stripping away the armor, the camouflage, the illusion, and standing as himself. Not Staff Sergeant Ellis, just Darren, a man, and a target. The courthouse in downtown Belridge looked more like a converted library than a temple of justice. Aged brickwork, dull marble pillars, and an air of forgotten civic pride. But inside courtroom 2A, the mood was anything but quaint. The gallery was packed. News crews loitered outside. The viral video had ignited something. Not just outrage, but curiosity. What happens when a decorated Army staff sergeant gets brutalized on camera? Does justice blink, or does it finally see? Darren walked into the courtroom, not in uniform, but in a charcoal gray suit. Simple, clean, dignified. He debated this choice all night. Kayla had asked if he wanted to wear his army dress blues. But he'd said no. He didn't want to wear something that proved his worth. He wanted to stand as himself and force them to see a man. Not a rank, not a ribbon, just a man. As he took his seat at the defense table, eyes followed him. Jurors, observers. Even Officer Langford, seated a few rows back, arms folded, flanked by his union representative and lawyer. Judge Miriam Calloway, a stern black woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, entered from chambers. The bailiff called, "All rise." Everyone stood, except Darren. Not out of protest, he just couldn't. Something in his knees refused. The courtroom didn't notice, but Judge Calloway did. Her eyes flicked toward him for a split second, then she nodded once. Let it pass. The prosecution began. The assistant DA, a young, overconfident white man named Pearson, laid out the case with a grin that never quite touched his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case about uniforms. This is not about medals or the military. It's about procedure. It's about a man who resisted a lawful stop, who escalated the encounter, and who, by his own admission, refused to comply." Kayla didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she stood calmly, one hand resting lightly on the table. "What you'll see," she said, "is a man who did everything right, and still got thrown to the pavement." She walked slowly in front of the jury box. "You'll see body cam footage that contradicts the police report. You'll see inconsistencies in the officer's statements. But more than anything, you'll see something undeniable in the video: fear." She paused, but not from the officer, from Darren Ellis, a decorated soldier, a law-abiding citizen, a man who wore his uniform because he thought it would protect him. She turned to the jury, and on that day, it didn't. Over the next 2 days, the trial unfolded. Kayla presented the cell phone video from the bystander, the footage that had gone viral. The angle showed Darren being compliant, polite, measured. It showed the officers growing agitated, escalating things without cause. Then came the body cam footage from Officer Langford. The same moment when Darren mentioned he lived nearby, Langford's voice, "What's a guy like you doing in this neighborhood?" And then the moment that changed the room, Langford, muttering, barely audible. But the subtitles caught it. "These people always think they're untouchable once they put on some ribbons." A collective breath sucked in across the gallery. Langford's attorney immediately objected. Context, volume, relevance. Judge Calloway allowed it. The jury leaned forward. Darren remained still. But his hands gripped his thighs, knuckles white. Then came the testimony. Langford took the stand. He wore a blue suit, not his uniform. He looked nervous, but polished. When asked why he initiated the stop, he claimed suspicion based on mismatched plates. "I didn't know who he was. He was evasive, uncooperative." Kayla stood. "Did he tell you he was in the military?" Langford paused. "Yes, Did he show you identification? Yes. Did you believe it was real? I thought it could be forged. Happens sometimes. Did you call to verify it? I was going to. Before or after you slammed his head into the pavement? Objection. Overruled. Langford's jaw clenched. Kayla walked slowly toward him. Officer, do you remember saying, these people always think they're untouchable once they put on some ribbons? Langford hesitated. I don't recall saying that. You don't recall, or you deny it? Silence. Let me rephrase, Kayla said. Would it surprise you to learn that the man you cuffed and humiliated earned a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning Humvee under direct enemy fire in Kandahar? Langford blinked. A few jurors looked visibly shaken. I wasn't aware of that, he said. No, I bet you weren't, Kayla said softly. Outside the court, reporters swarmed, but inside, Kayla had one more surprise. She called her final witness, Officer Ray Novak, a 28-year-old rookie officer who had been on the scene that day. Langford's partner in training. Ray looked visibly tense. He glanced once toward Langford, then looked away. Under oath, he admitted, I didn't agree with how the stop went down. Why not? Kayla asked. Because Darren Ellis complied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. Did Officer Langford escalate the situation? Pause. Yes. Murmurs in the gallery. And when Mr. Ellis mentioned he was a soldier, what did Officer Langford say? Ray swallowed. He said, so what? Uniforms don't mean crap on this street. The room was dead silent. Why didn't you report it at the time? Kayla asked gently. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Ray looked straight at Langford. Afraid of ending up where he is now. He pointed at Darren. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Darren not guilty on all charges. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice. But it wasn't a victory parade. Outside, protesters chanted. Reporters shouted questions. Some praised Darren as a hero. Others accused him of playing the race card. Through it all, he said nothing. Just walked calmly down the steps of the courthouse, flanked by Kayla and his father. But before stepping into the car, he paused, turned to the cameras, and for the first time, addressed the crowd. I didn't ask to be a symbol, he said. I just asked to be seen as a man. And if I have to wear a uniform for you to see my humanity, then maybe it's not me who needs to change. He turned and left. The street fell quiet. The courtroom victory didn't feel like freedom. Not to Darren. The headlines roared for 48 hours, then moved on. Public sympathy, social media outrage, think pieces. The usual cycle. But when the cameras left, when the hashtags faded, something colder lingered. Quiet scrutiny, sideways glances, suspicion, not celebration. And worst of all, the silence from Fort Lyndon. No commendation, no internal memo, not even a check-in. Just the absence of recognition, louder than any slur. Darren sat in the back of a chapel on base that Friday, empty pews. Only the soft flickering of the candle in the altar's corner kept him company. He wasn't praying. He was listening to himself, to a question he couldn't shake. What happens to a soldier when the war is back home? On Monday morning, the Internal Affairs email landed in Officer Ray Novak's inbox. Subject line, interview request, Langford Incident Review. He stared at it for a long time. Across the room, at the precinct, Langford was laughing at something on his phone, surrounded by his usual crowd. A few slapped his back, others nodded silently. Novak closed the email, didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. He just let it sit. By Wednesday, rumors had started to spread. That Novak was talking too much. That someone had leaked to the press. That the wrong people were starting to ask the right questions. At the legal aid office, Kayla sat across from Darren with a folder she hadn't opened yet. She looked tired. Not physically, but spiritually. The kind of tired that comes from seeing the same script play out too many times. You've seen the footage, she said. You've testified. You won. It doesn't feel like winning. She nodded slowly. That's because the battle's not in the courtroom anymore. She opened the folder. Inside, a transcript. Snippets of internal emails from the Belridge Police Department, anonymously sent. The first line stopped Darren cold. Langford bodycam, delete versus redact. Below that, another. If Novak won't shut up, we move him off patrol. Fast. And another. Ellis is trying to turn this into a crusade. Let him swing in the wind. Kayla didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Darren's hands curled into fists. They're covering it. They tried. But someone inside leaked this. Who? Kayla paused. They didn't sign it. But they titled the email, The silence is breaking. That night, Darren knocked on a door he hadn't visited in years. Sergeant Mason Cruz opened it with a surprised blink. "Damn, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Darren said. "Just came back from the front." They sat in the backyard under a busted string of patio lights. Mason handed him a beer. "You still at Fort Linden?" "For now." "You thinking of leaving?" Darren shook his head. "I'm thinking of speaking." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to go there? A lot of folks still think it's better when men like us stay in formation." Darren looked at the grass. "I've been in formation my whole life." Then, "Mason, you ever felt like the uniform wasn't for us? Like we borrowed it, rented respect?" Mason didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled his sleeve up, showed a scar Darren had never seen before, faint, jagged, hidden under a tattoo. "Fort Polk, 2009, Mason said. "I was off duty, in civilian clothes. The white guy pulled a gun on me in a parking lot, said I looked like I was breaking into my own car." He took a long sip of beer. "That night, I started wearing my fatigues to pump gas." They sat in silence. Two soldiers, two survivors, two men, tired of pretending dignity, came stitched into a patch. The next day, it happened. A whistleblower from inside Belridge PD, an unnamed source, leaked footage from inside the station, recorded days after Darren's arrest. The video spread like wildfire. It showed Officer Langford laughing with another officer, reenacting the arrest, mocking Darren's tone of voice. "Yes, sir. I'm Staff Sergeant Ellis." "Yeah, right. Probably just another stolen valor case." Then the room got quiet in the footage. Langford looked toward the camera and said, "Even if he was military, doesn't matter. Black guy in a white neighborhood, you stop him. You stop him hard." The video hit Twitter, then cable news. Langford was suspended for 6 hours. The police union called it edited out of context. But the silence, that silence Darren had lived in for years, was finally cracking. At a community town hall, Darren was invited to speak. He almost said no. He didn't want a stage. He didn't want applause. But he went. He stood before a crowd of 300, including veterans, students, and cops. And when he spoke, his voice didn't shout. It didn't rage. It cut. "My name is Darren Ellis. I served 3 tours overseas. I wore the flag on my shoulder in places where I could have been killed for the color of my uniform." He paused. "But back home, I found that some still see my skin before my stripes." He looked out at the crowd. "I used to wear my uniform to feel safe. That's not pride. That's trauma. That's survival." A murmur ran through the room. "I didn't want to be your hashtag. I didn't ask to be a headline. I just wanted to buy groceries." Silence. And then an officer in the back stood. Ray Novak. He raised his hand, then his voice. "We were taught to protect and serve. I want to do that, but I also want to start by listening." Others followed. One by one, people stood. Not in protest, not in defense, but in recognition. 3 days later, Darren received a letter in the mail. It was from the Department of the Army. Request for advisory role, Community Relations and Justice Reform Committee. Underneath, a handwritten note. "We failed you once. Help us build something that won't fail the next one." He stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it carefully, slid it into his chest pocket, not his uniform pocket, just the shirt he wore that day. Because now, he didn't need camouflage to be seen. It was a quiet Monday morning when Darren returned to Fort Linden, not as a soldier on duty, but as a guest. He wore no uniform, just a collared shirt, dark slacks, and the pin from his bronze star tucked discreetly into his left breast pocket. The room he stepped into wasn't a courtroom or a war room. It was a classroom. Inside, 24 cadets sat in stiff chairs, backs straight, eyes forward. Most were barely into their 20s. Some still carried that gleam in their eyes, untouched by disillusionment. The course was titled Ethics and Civilian Engagement in Military Leadership. But what Darren came to share couldn't be found in a textbook. He stood at the front of the room, hands in his pockets. "You know," he began, "when I joined the Army, I thought the uniform would be the great equalizer. That once you put it on, the world would stop seeing color and only see country." He scanned the room. Turns out, sometimes the uniform just hides the battles you're fighting here, at home. The cadets sat still, silent, listening. Darren paced slowly, then stopped. "I want to tell you about 2 days in my life. The first was in Kandahar, when I dragged 3 wounded soldiers out of a burning convoy. I was scared, sure, but I knew who the enemy was. I knew the mission. He swallowed. The second day was in Belridge, Virginia. I was arrested while wearing this, he tapped the lapel pin, by a man who didn't care what I'd done, only what I looked like. A few cadets shifted in their seats, others stayed frozen. That day, I wasn't a soldier, I wasn't a citizen. I was a silhouette, a profile. He let the silence linger. But I want to tell you this, because if you end up leading men and women, you won't just be commanding troops, you'll be shaping culture. Influence doesn't just happen on battlefields. It happens in parking lots, in courtrooms, in moments when you speak up or stay quiet. One hand went up in the back. A young white cadet asked, "Sergeant Ellis, how do we fix this? I mean, what can we do?" Darren smiled faintly. "You listen," he said. "You ask that question, not once but every day. You carry the flag, not just on your shoulder, but inside." Months passed. Darren declined most interviews, ignored offers to write a book. He didn't want to become a symbol packaged for sound bites. Instead, he focused on impact. He joined the advisory committee on justice reform. Not for the spotlight, but for the cadets, the recruits, the kids in neighborhoods like his. He walked into police academies, not to accuse, but to educate. He met with legislators, not to rage, but to recommend. And most days he still stopped by the corner market, sometimes still in civilian clothes, sometimes not. But now people saw him. The same man, no uniform required. One day, walking back to his car, he saw a boy, maybe 10 years old, staring at him from the curb. Curious. Quiet. Darren waved. The boy stepped forward and said, "You're the soldier from the news, right?" Darren hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, that was me." The boy looked down at the ground, then up again. "My big brother wants to be in the army too, but he's scared." "Scared of what?" Darren asked gently. "Scared he won't belong." Darren crouched to meet his eyes. "Tell him this," he said. "The uniform doesn't make you belong. The courage to wear it with truth, that's what does." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded patch, the kind they give new recruits, extended it to the boy. "Give him this, and tell him he's already part of something bigger." Night, Darren returned home. The living room was warm with the soft hum of the radio, the scent of coffee lingering in the air. Framed photos lined the mantel. His father in Vietnam, his own squad in Kandahar, a letter from the Pentagon folded beside a picture of his niece blowing out birthday candles. He looked at them all, then picked up the last photo, one taken during his first day at boot camp. No medals, no camouflage. Just a wide-eyed young man with a shaved head and a trembling smile. He turned the photo over, blank. He reached for a pen, and for the first time he wrote something on the back. A soldier not just of war, but of what comes after. He set it down, sat quietly, no noise, no applause, just the peace that comes when you no longer need a uniform to stand tall.